In a world where the dead walk and humanity teeters on the edge of extinction, the wolves are an elite team of cured soldiers, people who have survived the zombie virus but are forever changed. Loyd Jones and his pack risk their lives to protect a society that fears and shuns them, all while using prisoners like Ryan as bait to lure the undead. In this tense survival horror tale, Loyd and Ryan navigate a fractured world where trust is scarce and the line between man and monster is blurred. As they face hordes of infected and the distrust of the living, they grapple with what it means to stay human when the world around them is crumbling. Will they make it through alive? And even if they do, what kind of world awaits them on the other side? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more chilling survival horror stories and atmospheric ambience. Stay tuned for more tales of terror. Chapter 1: The Wolves. Loyd Jones stood at the edge of the settlement, the heavy iron gates looming behind him like the jaws of a ravenous beast. The distant sounds of life filtered through the walls, children laughing, neighbors arguing about trivial things. But here, in the shaded enclave of the cured, the world felt cold and distant. He was part of the wolves, a group that had once been a promise of salvation, now just a stark reminder of how deeply fear had settled into the bones of society. The cured were the rare few who had somehow escaped the zombie virus, a small fraction of humanity with a survival rate that lingered around 12%. That tiny sliver made them both revered and reviled. Loyd could sense it. The distrust, the narrowed eyes, the whispered conversations that halted when he walked by. They had all seen the truth on the news. Cured people couldn't be trusted. Ryan, their sheep, was a prisoner kept in a cage near the settlement. He wasn't one of the infected, but his very existence drew the dead like moths to a flame. The way they reacted to him was almost feral, a primal urge that made the zombies rage with hunger. It was unsettling, a reminder that the infected were still capable of reason in their twisted minds, recognizing life when it crossed their path. Loyd. Jason's voice broke through his thoughts, pulling him back to the present. Jason's expression was serious, his jaw set tight. It's time. Loyd nodded, steeling himself for the hunt. They were the wolves, predators in a world gone mad. The fear and resentment they faced in the settlement didn't matter once they were outside the gates. Out there, the dead roamed freely, and it was their job to thin the herd. As the pack moved through the settlement, their boots crunched against gravel, the sound echoing like a countdown. Each member of the wolves was skilled, bonded by shared experiences and the knowledge that every mission could be their last. The scent of decay filled the air, heavy and cloying, a constant reminder of their purpose. Once they reached the outer perimeter, Loyd caught sight of Ryan through the bars of his prison. The man's eyes were wide and pleading, filled with desperation. "Loyd, you have to let me out. I can help." "I'm ready." But the rules were clear. Ryan was their bait, their sheep, a necessary evil to draw the zombies in. "You'll get your chance, Ryan. Just hold tight." The words felt hollow, a promise wrapped in deception. They would need him alive, and the pack couldn't afford to let emotions cloud their judgment. They slipped through the settlement gates, stepping into the remnants of a world that had been twisted by death. Buildings lay crumbled, the streets overrun with weeds and silence, a haunting landscape that spoke of what was lost. Loyd felt a thrill rush through him. This was the hunt, a dance of survival, and the wolves were poised to lead. As they ventured deeper into the heart of the dead, the air shifted. The zombies were close, lurking in the shadows, and Loyd could almost hear their hunger. They could smell life, could sense the pulse of something warm and beating nearby. "Stick to the plan," Jason whispered, his voice steady. "We'll use Ryan to lure them out. Stay sharp." Loyd nodded, gripping his weapon tightly. The hunt was on, and they had to be smart. Each member of the pack was trained to handle the undead, but there was a dark shadow hanging over them, a reminder of how easily things could go wrong. They were the hunters, yes, but they were also hunted in a world that saw them as monsters. As the wolves settled into their positions, Loyd cast one last glance at Ryan's cage, the man's hope a desperate thing that weighed heavily in the air. What if they failed? What if he was never set free? The thought gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside. Survival came first, for him and for the pack. Then they heard it, the guttural growls of the zombies echoing through the streets, the chorus of the damned. The hunt had begun. In the darkness, the wolves prowled, each movement a calculated step in their deadly dance. Loyd could feel the eyes of the dead on him, could sense the thin line between predator and prey, blurring with every heartbeat. They were out here to eliminate the threat, yes, but deep down, Loyd knew they were also fighting for their place in a world that had cast them aside. This was just the beginning, and the more kills they racked up, the more the darkness pressed in around them. The wolves might have been hunting the undead, but they were also battling against the specter of fear that clung to them, a reminder that even the most human of hearts could be reduced to mere prey in an unforgiving world. Chapter 2: Homecoming. The pack returned to the settlement just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched across the pavement like fingers grasping for warmth. The air was heavy with tension, the kind that made the hair on the back of Loyd's neck stand up. He stepped through the gates, the clang of metal echoing ominously behind him, a sound that felt like a door slamming shut on a fading nightmare. "Looks like everyone has to return to their pens," Ryan muttered, a wry smile curling his lips. His attempt at humor fell flat against the grim reality they all faced. The pens were their cramped quarters within the cured ghetto, a cruel term for the housing where the wolves and other survivors lived. Loyd didn't have the heart to respond, his mind already racing with thoughts of home. Outside the settlement's walls, chaos brewed. A mass of protesters surged like a tide, their shouts rising in a chorus of hatred that wrapped around the pack like a suffocating blanket. "Monsters!" they screamed, their voices rising in a pitch of pure, unfiltered rage. "Kill the cured! They don't belong here!" Loyd felt a familiar heat flush through him, anger mingled with sadness. These were people who had lost loved ones, friends, and family to the dead, and now they were taking it out on the very souls who had survived. The irony wasn't lost on him. They were called the cured, yet in the eyes of the public, they were just as monstrous as the undead that roamed the outskirts. As the guards stood at the gates, rifles ready, the wolves were herded back toward the ghetto. The heavy metal doors creaked open, and they were met with the smell of sweat and fear, mingled with the mustiness of decay. The tension was palpable. Even the guards seemed wary, their eyes darting nervously between the angry crowd and the cured coming back home. Loyd's heart quickened as he scanned the faces in the throng, searching for the familiar warmth of his family. Then he spotted them, his wife, Claire, standing protectively in front of their son, Oliver. She was a cured like him, her presence a beacon in the storm of animosity surrounding them. Oliver, however, was different. He had never known the horror of infection, yet he bore the mark of fear. In this new world, just being the son of a cured was enough to cast suspicion on him. "Dad," Oliver shouted, his voice breaking through the chaos as he broke free from Claire's grasp, rushing toward Loyd. The boy's eyes shone with a mix of excitement and anxiety, a child too young to fully grasp the gravity of their situation, but old enough to feel the weight of judgment. "Hey, champ," Loyd said, kneeling to embrace his son, the warmth of Oliver's body grounding him in the moment. "How was your day?" "Bad," Oliver replied, his voice dropping as he glanced back at the protesters, fear flickering in his wide eyes. They were shouting again. They said, "You guys were monsters, are you?" "Of course not," Claire interjected, wrapping her arms around both of them. "Your dad is a hero. He helps keep us safe." The protesters roared with anger, drowning out Claire's comforting words. They hurled insults, their faces twisted with rage, and for a brief moment, Loyd could feel the resentment gnawing at his insides. They were rebuilding from the ashes of a world shattered by the dead, but with every protest, every jeer, he saw how trust had been eroded to dust. "Don't listen to them, Oliver," Loyd said, pulling back to look his son in the eye. "We're not monsters. We're survivors." But the truth lingered unspoken, like a shadow that stretched long and deep in the fading light. How could anyone trust a group of people who had once been infected? The line between human and monster had blurred in a way that made rebuilding this fractured society seem like an impossible task. As they walked toward the ghetto, the protesters continued to scream, their voices rising and falling like a haunting melody of despair. Loyd could feel the weight of their stares, the suspicion and fear pouring over them like rain. They were the cured, but that designation felt like a curse rather than a blessing. Inside the ghetto, the atmosphere shifted from hostility to something heavier, a miasma of guilt and sorrow. The walls were closing in, and even though they were physically safe, Loyd felt trapped within the confines of their existence. He led Claire and Oliver through the narrow corridors, each turn echoing with the memories of those who had fallen to the dead. "How long do you think we can keep this up?" Loyd asked quietly, turning to Claire as they settled into their small space, the weight of the world pressing down on him. "What if they find a reason to push us out?" Claire's eyes were resolute, even in the face of uncertainty. "As long as we stick together, we'll be fine. They can't take everything from us." But Loyd knew that hope was a fragile thing, one that could shatter under the pressure of a single blow. He had seen the darkness in people's eyes, the way fear could turn neighbors into enemies. As he watched Oliver play with a toy, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing outside, he couldn't help but feel that their fight for acceptance was only just beginning. The world had changed, and they were all struggling to find their place in it, teetering on the edge of a knife. Loyd would protect his family at all costs, but as the protests raged on outside, he wondered how long it would be before the walls began to crumble. Chapter 3. Life as a Sheep. Ryan Jones leaned against the cold concrete wall of his cell, the faint light filtering through the barred window, casting long shadows across the floor. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and despair, the kind that clung to the skin and sank into the soul. He watched as the sun dipped lower in the sky, its fading warmth a cruel reminder of the world outside, one that was so close yet painfully out of reach. In the prison, he was nothing more than a sheep, a label that carried the weight of shame and distrust. The other inmates had made it abundantly clear that they saw him as a traitor, a pawn in the game of survival. Bandits didn't deserve sympathy, they told him, not after what they had done when the world fell apart. The irony wasn't lost on Ryan. Here he was, branded a criminal, forced to lure the undead to their deaths while he waited for a sliver of hope, an impossible dream of redemption. Each day bled into the next, a monotonous routine that left him feeling hollow. He awoke to the clang of metal doors, the harshness of reality slapping him awake like an unforgiving hand. The guards moved through the halls, their boots echoing ominously, and Ryan would hear the muffled sounds of prisoners muttering to each other, casting glances his way, their disdain palpable. "Look, it's the sheep," one inmate would call out, his voice laced with mockery. "Better watch your back, or you might get shorn." Ryan kept his head down, trying to ignore the taunts, but the insults echoed in his mind like a relentless drumbeat. The laughter of the other inmates sliced through him, sharp and cruel. They had their own reasons for being here. Murderers, thieves, men who had betrayed their friends. But Ryan's past was a constant reminder of his failings. He had been part of a gang, a group of raiders who thrived on chaos when civilization crumbled. Now, he was just a man trying to survive, but he would never escape the shadows of his former life. During the day, Ryan was given menial tasks, cleaning the common areas, sorting through scraps of food, and sometimes standing guard, albeit in a limited capacity. The guards rarely trusted him, but his knowledge of the outside world, how the zombies roamed, where they congregated, made him a valuable asset, even if he didn't feel like one. He felt like a ghost, drifting through the motions of his new existence. "Hey, sheep!" Another inmate jeered one afternoon, his laughter contagious among his companions. "Why don't you go out and bleat at the zombies? Maybe they'll take you back home." Ryan clenched his fists, but he kept his mouth shut. Responding would only give them the satisfaction they sought. Instead, he forced a laugh and shrugged it off, the bitterness rising in his throat. It was better to play the role, to be the fool, than to give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. The sheep concept was simple, but brutal. Those who performed well, who led the zombies away from their pack, could earn points that might one day lead to their freedom. Ryan had watched as some of the other sheep attempted to escape, only to be dragged back, punished for their folly. He knew the risks. Many never made it back, their fate sealed by the undead they had tried to outsmart. One day, Ryan overheard a group of inmates discussing their own pasts. They shared tales of their glory days, reminiscing about the chaos that had ruled the world. It was a twisted kind of bonding, one that left Ryan feeling even more isolated. They spoke of heists and betrayals, each story steeped in bravado, and he couldn't help but feel the sharp pang of regret stab at him. While they reveled in their memories, he was trapped in a prison of his own making, a man shackled by his choices. In the evenings, when the shadows grew long and the cell block became quieter, Ryan would close his eyes and imagine a different life. A life where he hadn't chosen the path of a raider, where he had embraced his family instead of running from them. He thought of his little sister, her laughter ringing like a bell, a sound that felt both comforting and haunting. Would she still be alive? Would she even want to see him again, after everything? But those thoughts only brought more pain, and he learned to push them aside, to bury them deep down where the light couldn't reach. Instead, he focused on the present, counting the days until he could prove himself, until he could earn enough points to buy his freedom. Ryan knew it wouldn't be easy. Trust was a commodity he could no longer afford, especially among the inmates who saw him as little more than a traitor. But he had to believe that there was a way out of this hell, a chance for redemption. All he needed was one opportunity, one moment to prove he wasn't the monster they thought he was. And as the nights fell darker and the whispers of the undead lingered outside the walls, he held on to that hope, fragile as it was, ready to fight for his place among the living once again. Chapter 4. The Mission. Ryan stood among the other sheep and wolves, the weight of their collective anxiety thick in the air. The meeting room was a converted garage, its walls lined with makeshift partitions adorned with crudely drawn maps and scattered notes. The atmosphere hummed with tension as they gathered, their fates hanging in the balance. Loyd Jones, the leader of their pack, stood at the front, his jaw set in determination. "Listen up," he barked, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "We've got an urgent request from the North Haven settlement. They've been overrun, and they need our help. We're the only ones close enough to assist." "Overrun?" Ryan scoffed, his tone laced with skepticism. "What? They couldn't handle a few zombies? Sounds like they're just looking for scapegoats." The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to him. Ryan felt the weight of their gazes, a mixture of disdain and curiosity. He straightened, his heart racing. "How many points are we talking about for this little excursion?" he continued, his voice cold and calculating. Loyd shot him a warning look, but Ryan wasn't finished. "I'm serious. If we're risking our lives out there, I want to know what's in it for us. I don't plan on dying for free." "Ryan, this isn't about points," Loyd replied, frustration creeping into his voice. "This is about saving lives. We have a responsibility to save lives?" Ryan interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "Spare me the hero speech. We're not doing this for altruism. If I'm going to go out there and put myself in the crosshairs, I want to know it's worth it. How many points do we get for a confirmed kill? What's the point value for securing a perimeter?" The murmurs began again, voices rising in debate. The other wolves exchanged glances, unsure how to react to Ryan's sudden boldness. One of the other sheep, a wiry man named Marco, piped up. "What if we don't make it back? Those zombies don't exactly play nice." "Yeah," Ryan said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "And what if I don't make it back? Then I'm just another ghost haunting the settlement. It's not like I'm anyone's beloved sheep." Loyd took a deep breath, visibly trying to rein in his frustration. "We'll negotiate the points once we've secured the settlement. For now, our priority is to neutralize the threat and protect the civilians. That's our job." "Job?" Ryan echoed, incredulity coloring his tone. "You call this a job? This is a death sentence wrapped in a fancy bow. I want assurances, Loyd." The tension in the room crackled like static. Another member of the pack, a burly man named Frank, stepped forward. "You're playing a dangerous game, Ryan. You think you can just waltz in and make demands? This isn't a game. It's our lives on the line." "Exactly," Ryan replied, leaning into the confrontation. "That's why I'm negotiating. If we're going to face the horde, I want to make sure I'm getting something out of it. Maybe I'm not the only one who feels this way." Loyd's eyes narrowed, assessing the mood of the group. "We're all risking our lives," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. But if we're going to do this, we have to stick together. No one gets left behind. That's how we survive." Ryan crossed his arms, his demeanor defiant. "And if we die, what then? You think this will end the distrust? You think they'll welcome us back with open arms?" "Enough," Loyd's voice boomed, silencing the room. "We'll discuss the details later. Right now, we have a mission to prepare for." The wolves and sheep began to disperse, tension still lingering in the air like smoke. Ryan felt the weight of their skepticism as he gathered his gear, readying himself for the mission. He could feel the others' eyes on him, their doubts simmering just beneath the surface. As he tightened the straps on his backpack, Marco approached him. "You really think you can negotiate your way out of this? You might end up being the one that gets us all killed. Or maybe I'll be the one who gets us points," Ryan shot back, trying to mask the uncertainty creeping in. "We'll see who's left standing when this is all over." Marco shook his head, a mix of concern and disbelief. "Just don't let it get to your head. We need to watch each other's backs out there." Yeah, Ryan muttered, dismissing the advice. But deep down, he felt the weight of the responsibility resting on his shoulders. This was his chance, his shot at redemption. He just had to survive long enough to take it. As the group prepared for the mission, the shadows lengthened outside the settlement gates, the distant groans of the undead echoing like a dark omen. The air was thick with uncertainty, but Ryan was ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead. He was no longer just a sheep. He was a man on a mission, and he intended to come out on top, points be damned. Chapter 5. The Road to Ruin. The Humvee bounced along the cracked pavement, the tires crunching over the remnants of what used to be a thriving community. Dead trees clawed at the sky, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands grasping for salvation. The air was thick with the scent of decay, a grim reminder of the world that had been. Loyd Jones sat behind the wheel, his eyes scanning the horizon, searching for movement among the wreckage. "We should have brought snacks," he grumbled, glancing at the two men beside him. Nothing like a little roadside apocalypse to work up an appetite. "Yeah, a nice steak would hit the spot right now," replied Marco, a hefty man with a thick beard and an even thicker sense of humor. "Maybe a side of zombie stew?" Ryan, seated in the back, couldn't help but smirk at their banter, even as the tension in his stomach churned. "You two really need to work on your culinary aspirations. How about a nice bowl of crushed skulls instead?" "Yeah, very funny, Ryan," Loyd shot back, rolling his eyes. "Maybe if you played your cards right, you could get a good recipe while you're at it. You know, before you end up as one of those dishes." "Keep dreaming, Jones. I'm not on the menu today," Ryan retorted, his voice edged with bitterness. The truth was, he could feel the weight of their judgment, the suspicion that hung in the air like a dark cloud. He was a sheep, after all, a living bait for the infected. It wasn't lost on him that his life depended on the very creatures he was supposed to help eliminate. The landscape shifted, revealing a horde of undead shambling in the distance, drawn to the sound of the Humvee's engine. A few of them stumbled towards the vehicle, their lifeless eyes vacant but full of that unholy hunger. "Looks like the welcome committee," Marco chuckled, but there was an edge to his humor. He tightened his grip on his rifle, ready for whatever would come. Suddenly, a crack echoed through the air, and a zombie's head exploded in a shower of gore. A sniper's bullet had taken it down before it could even reach the road. The pack perked up, each man instinctively leaning out of the windows to survey the carnage. "Whoever that was, they've got a good aim," Loyd muttered, impressed. "I'll take that any day over dealing with those things up close." The sound of gunfire drew the undead like moths to a flame, but they couldn't keep up with the Humvee's speed. Another shot rang out, and another zombie fell, their gnarled bodies tumbling over themselves in the wake of death. It was an eerie dance, the way they fell, limbs splayed awkwardly as if caught in a macabre performance. "What do you think they were before all this?" Marco asked, a strange curiosity flickering in his eyes. "You think any of them were decent people?" Ryan shrugged, the image of their past lives swirling in his mind like smoke. "Does it even matter? They're just meat now, flesh and bone, nothing more." He hated the way it sounded, but he was no stranger to survival. He knew better than to romanticize the dead. "Tche," Loyd replied, glancing back at Ryan in the rearview mirror. Just remember, one day you could be in their shoes. We all could. The atmosphere in the Humvee shifted, laughter fading into an uncomfortable silence. Each of them was aware of their own precarious position in this hellish world, a reminder that their fates hung by a thread. As they continued down the road, the landscape became bleaker, the remnants of humanity giving way to the oppressive gloom of the apocalypse. The snipers kept firing, thinning the ranks of the undead, and for a moment, the pack felt a rush of exhilaration. We'll clear this settlement, get back safe, and maybe, just maybe, I can earn my freedom, Ryan thought, the flicker of determination pushing through the dread. Hey, Marco called out suddenly, breaking the silence. Anyone else want to place bets on how many we take down today? I say we can hit 100 if we're lucky. Careful, Marco, Loyd grinned, his eyes sparkling with mischief. We might end up getting more than we bargained for. Just don't forget to keep an eye out for the sheep, Ryan added dryly. You never know when one might need to make a dramatic exit. Chapter 6: The Macabre Game. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the barren wasteland as the Humvee rumbled toward the settlement. The closer they got, the more unsettling the scene became. The settlement was surrounded by the infected, hundreds of them wandering aimlessly like broken puppets whose strings had been cut. Their bodies twitched with the hunger for life that had long since abandoned them. Loyd's pack tensed, each member gripping their weapons tighter as the infected came into view. Shit, Marco muttered from the passenger seat, his eyes scanning the horde. That's a lot more than I thought. Ryan, sitting in the back, glanced at Loyd. What's the play? Loyd's gaze never left the road as he slowed the Humvee to a crawl. Phalanx position. We move as one. The sniper stays on the Humvee, picks off anything that gets too close. Ryan, you know what you need to do. Ryan nodded, though his gut churned. His job was simple in theory. Bait. Step out into the middle of the pack, stand there, and let the undead hone in on him. The wolves would then clean up the mess. It wasn't glamorous, and it sure as hell wasn't safe, but it worked. Time and time again. The gate to the settlement creaked open, a signal that the survivors inside were counting on the wolves to do their job. The pack dismounted the Humvee, their boots hitting the cracked pavement with an ominous thud. All right, form up, Loyd barked. His voice carried over the moaning of the infected. His pack moved swiftly, each man taking his place in the phalanx formation. Shields up front, rifles just behind, with the sniper taking position on top of the Humvee, scanning the area through the scope. Ryan's stomach twisted as he stepped into the middle of the formation, walking dead center, where the shield of the wolves would protect him. The infected wandered close, brushing against the invisible barrier that seemed to hang around Ryan, unable to sense him, until he got too close. It was like some part of their decayed minds could almost recognize the living soul amongst them. For a brief moment, the scene was eerily quiet. The infected shuffled, mindless and lost. Then, as Ryan took his final steps into the middle of the formation, something shifted. One of the infected's heads snapped up, eyes wide with sudden rage. Then another, and another. A ripple of awareness spread through the horde, like a violent shockwave traveling through a hive mind. It began. The undead let out a collective guttural moan as they launched themselves toward the wolves. Like a twisted football game, they surged forward with the primal drive to tear into the one thing they craved: life. Ryan was the prize, and the wolves were the only line of defense. Here they come, Marco yelled, his rifle already trained on the nearest attacker. He squeezed the trigger, the infected's head exploding into a spray of bone and blood. Hold the line, Loyd barked, moving with purpose. His shield smashed into the decayed body of an infected soldier, sending it crashing to the ground. The pack worked as a machine, every strike coordinated, every movement calculated. But the infected kept coming. Ryan stayed in the center, his heart pounding as the chaos unfolded around him. The horde didn't care about the phalanx or the bullets. All they saw was him, standing there like a beacon of life in a world of death. They tore at each other, clawing over the fallen, desperate to reach him. The battle was unlike anything Ryan had ever seen. The wolves moved like gladiators, shields slamming into rotten flesh, rifles firing in unison, picking off the undead with surgical precision. The sniper on the Humvee was a machine, dropping one infected after another from the rooftop, clearing any stragglers who managed to get close. "On your left," Marco shouted, driving his blade into the skull of a shrieking woman with a chunk of her face missing. The body fell limp, but two more took her place immediately. The infected slammed against the formation, but the wolves held strong. It was like a grotesque dance, with bodies falling, the pack moving in sync like seasoned warriors. Ryan, despite the horror around him, couldn't help but admire the precision. But this was no time for admiration. His own survival was at stake too. Suddenly, the formation was breached. One of the infected, a massive brute of a man with a gaping hole in his chest, broke through the line, charging straight at Ryan. Time seemed to slow. The thing's eyes locked on him, burning with hatred. "Ryan, move!" Loyd yelled, but Ryan froze. The brute lunged, hands outstretched, its rotting teeth snapping together with the promise of death. A rifle shot rang out. The brute's head snapped back and it dropped at Ryan's feet, a lifeless heap. Marco gave Ryan a nod, his rifle still smoking. "Keep it together, man," Marco shouted. "We don't have time for you to freeze up." Ryan blinked, snapping back to reality. The phalanx reformed around him as the pack continued to cut down the infected. But there were still so many of them. The sheer number of undead was overwhelming, and the wolves were tiring. "We've got to end this quick," Loyd muttered, slamming his shield into another attacker. "We're running out of time." Ryan knew what that meant. The wolves couldn't hold the line forever. If they didn't secure the settlement soon, they'd all be overrun. The infected wouldn't stop, not until there was nothing left. "Fall back toward the gate," Loyd ordered. "We need to regroup." The pack moved as one, slowly retreating toward the settlement's open gate. The sniper fired round after round, thinning the herd as best he could. But the horde kept coming, relentless, driven by hunger and fury. As they neared the gate, Ryan glanced back at the settlement. People were watching from behind the walls, their faces a mix of fear and desperation. They were counting on the wolves to succeed. But in the pit of his stomach, Ryan knew this was only the beginning. The dead weren't just wandering aimlessly anymore. They were hunting, and they were getting smarter. The wolves were good, but how long could they keep this up? Chapter 7. The Howl of Battle. The roar of gunfire and the shrieks of the infected filled the air, a chaotic symphony that was becoming all too familiar. The wolves stood strong, but the tide of the dead was relentless. Loyd's pack fought with the precision of seasoned killers, but the weight of the horde bore down on them, harder and faster with each passing second. Ryan was at the center of it all, the reason for the undead's frenzy. As the pack held their ground, more and more infected peeled away from the chaos to lunge at him. His heart pounded in his chest as their rotting faces twisted with that primal hunger, eyes locked onto him like a target they couldn't resist. "Hold the line," Loyd bellowed, his shield crashing into the skull of an infected soldier, sending it sprawling back. "Don't let them through." Marco, breathing heavy, slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle and fired off a quick burst, dropping two more zombies that were getting too close. "They're all going for Ryan," he growled. Damn sheep lost their bait. It was true. From where they fought, Ryan could see the chaos unfolding with the other packs. Screams filled the air as packs scattered and struggled. Sheep, the unfortunate bait meant to lure out the dead, were being torn apart left and right. With each sheep lost, the infected turned toward the next closest target, Ryan. "Shit, they're zeroing in on him," Marco called out, his shots growing more frantic as more undead converged on Ryan's position. Loyd, still calm under pressure, barked out orders. "Form tighter, we'll hold them off." His shield came down again with a brutal thud, crushing the skull of another infected. But there were too many. The horde surged with renewed vigor, desperate to reach the last remaining sheep. Ryan was trying to keep his composure, but the pressure was mounting. The wolves around him were starting to falter. One misstep, one wrong move, and they would be overrun. "They're getting closer, boss," Marco shouted, taking a step back as the undead closed in. His rifle jammed. "Crap!" Ryan's pulse quickened as he saw the gap forming in their defenses. The zombies were getting closer, their teeth gnashing, limbs flailing. He could almost feel their breath, what little was left of it, on his skin. "This is it," Ryan muttered to himself. He braced, waiting for the inevitable. But then, out of the blue, help arrived. The packs who had lost their sheep barreled into the fray, slamming into the infected from the side with a fury that only the wolves could muster. Gunfire echoed in the open air as they tore through the dead, creating a bloody path toward Loyd's pack. "Get off your asses, wolves," a voice rang out. One of the other pack leaders, Jackson. He was drenched in blood, his armor scarred and dented, but his eyes gleamed with determination. "We're not letting these bastards take you down." Jackson and his wolves tore through the infected, cutting down the horde with a level of ferocity that almost seemed supernatural. It wasn't long before the battlefield shifted. The balance of power tipped back toward the wolves, and together, they pressed the advantage. Marco, reloaded and back in the fight, grinned as he laid down covering fire for the other packs. "That's what I'm talking about." Loyd, swinging his blade with mechanical precision, nodded in approval as the tide turned. "I've seen worse." The battle was brutal, but within minutes, the undead started to thin out. The packs worked in unison, their movements sharp and coordinated. Every infected that tried to reach Ryan was met with a bullet or the blunt end of a shield. Slowly but surely, they mowed down the remaining zombies, turning the tide of the battle. When the last of the infected fell, the battlefield was littered with the bodies of the dead. The air was thick with the stench of decay and gunpowder, but for the wolves, it was the smell of victory. Loyd wiped the blood from his blade, glancing at the other pack leaders. "Good timing." Jackson grinned. "We couldn't let you hog all the fun, could we?" Ryan, still in the center of the group, took a deep breath. His nerves were shot, but he was alive, and that was more than most sheep could say after a fight like this. Marco smirked, looking at Ryan. "I gotta say, you've got a knack for staying alive. I've seen sheep drop like flies, but here you are, still breathing." "Don't get used to it," Ryan muttered, trying to mask his exhaustion. "I'm not planning on sticking around for much longer." Jackson chuckled. "You sure? Seems like you're getting pretty good at this whole bait thing." Ryan shot him a look. "I don't want to be good at this." Marco laughed, slapping Ryan on the shoulder. "Come on, you're practically a natural. You've got zombies running at you like you're the last meal on Earth." "Yeah, well," Ryan shrugged. "Maybe if I rack up enough points, I'll get to stop being the steak on the menu." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "How many more points do you need, anyway?" Ryan's lips twisted into a smirk. "More than I'll probably ever see at this rate." Loyd stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Keep your head on straight, Ryan. You make it out of this alive, you'll have more than enough points to be free." Ryan didn't respond, but there was a spark of something, maybe hope, maybe just defiance in his eyes. He knew the score. The wolves needed him, but for how long? And when the time came, would they really let him walk away? "Let's head back," Loyd finally said, signaling the end of the conversation. "We've got a lot of ground to cover before nightfall." As they turned to leave the battlefield behind, the banter picked up again, the wolves teasing Ryan, their usual gallows humor creeping back in. But as the sun set behind them, casting long shadows over the wasteland, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking a thin line between survival and something far worse. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure which side he'd end up on. Chapter 8. Wolves and Sheep. The sun was setting as the wolves made their way back into the settlement, the weight of their victory hanging heavy in the air. Exhausted, battered, but alive. As they passed through the gate, a familiar scene greeted them. Protesters lined the streets, waving signs, shouting obscenities, and demanding the cured be cast out. It was routine now. No matter how many times the wolves saved the settlement, they were still seen as monsters in disguise. Loyd walked at the head of the pack, his face hardened by the years and the battle that had just ended. His rifle was slung over his shoulder, his armor dented and blood-stained, but his eyes were calm. Beside him, Ryan walked with a slight limp, a reminder of just how close he had come to becoming one of the dead today. As they approached the gates to the cured ghetto, the crowd's shouts grew louder. "Monsters! Get out of our city! You're no better than the things you kill." Loyd glanced at the mob, his face unreadable. He'd heard it all before. It wasn't anger anymore, it was just noise, part of the life they led. Ryan, though, looked uneasy, his eyes scanning the crowd as they hurled insults and waved their banners. He wasn't used to it like the wolves were. Not yet. "They don't know, do they?" Ryan muttered, his voice low, barely audible over the jeers. Loyd shook his head. No, they never will. Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair. So why do it? Why fight for them when they hate you so much? Call you monsters? Say you're no different from the dead? Loyd was silent for a moment, the tension between them stretching in the quiet that followed Ryan's question. Then, without looking over, Loyd spoke. Because it's not about them. It's about my family, my son, my wife. They're cured like me. And I fight because we still have something to lose. Because maybe, just maybe, fighting keeps us human. Ryan glanced sideways at him. Human? They don't see you as human. Loyd chuckled dryly. No, they don't, but I do. The protesters' cries grew louder as they neared the ghetto gates. The guards were holding the crowd at bay, but the tension was palpable. One wrong move, one push, and things could get ugly fast. But the wolves ignored it, used to the daily venom from the ungrateful masses. Ryan couldn't help but feel the weight of it, though. Wolves in sheep's clothing, he muttered, recalling the words he'd heard more than once. That's what they call you, isn't it? Loyd gave a small nod. Yeah, they think we're just waiting for the right moment to turn. Like the virus is still inside us, waiting for a chance to come back. So they keep us locked in our pens, safe from the world we protect them from. Ryan laughed bitterly. Wolves in sheep's clothing? If that's what you are, then what does that make me? I'm no sheep. Not really. Loyd looked over at him, a hint of a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. Maybe you're a sheep in wolves' clothing. Ryan snorted. Funny, but the words lingered between them, a bitter truth hidden beneath the banter. Ryan was caught between two worlds, neither fully trusted by the cured, nor fully one of the infected. He was something else. Just like the wolves, he was tolerated for his usefulness, but he wasn't part of the world they were trying to rebuild. But as they walked through the gate, the protesters' voices faded behind them, the heavy metal clang of the doors sealing them inside the ghetto once again. Inside, it was quieter, but the weight of isolation pressed down on them. It was a different kind of cage, but a cage all the same. Loyd's wife was waiting for him, their son clinging to her leg. Her face softened when she saw him, the relief clear in her eyes. She rushed forward, wrapping her arms around him, the quiet, shared understanding of what they'd endured, filling the space between them. Their son looked up at Loyd with wide eyes, too young to fully grasp what his father did, but old enough to understand the danger. Did you get them, Dad? The bad guys? Loyd knelt down, ruffling the boy's hair. Yeah, buddy, we got them. Ryan watched the reunion from a distance, a pang of something unfamiliar twisting in his chest. He hadn't felt it in years, this thing that Loyd still held on to. Family. Hope. He'd let go of all that when the world fell apart. But standing there, watching Loyd with his family, it stirred something he'd thought was long dead. Loyd stood up, glancing back at Ryan. You get enough points today? Ryan shrugged. Maybe. Maybe not. You're still alive. That's something. Ryan let out a dry laugh. For now. Loyd's expression softened, just for a moment. Keep fighting, Ryan. It's the only thing keeping us human. Ryan didn't respond. He wasn't sure if there was anything human left in him, not after everything he'd done. But maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth fighting for. Something beyond survival. Something bigger than the walls of the settlement or the cries of the protesters outside. As they turned toward the rows of houses in the ghetto, the sun dipping below the horizon, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. For better or worse, he didn't know. But the world was still turning, and for now, he was still part of it. And maybe that was enough. For now. Thanks for tuning in to another spine-chilling story here on Survival Horror Ambience. As the wolves and their pack continue to fight through a world overrun by the dead, we're reminded that survival isn't just about beating the monsters outside. It's about holding on to what makes us human. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more immersive tales of survival, horror, and the unknown. And don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Stay safe out there, and remember, the real horror might be closer than you think.